It started the way most ordinary nights do. Two young people eating dinner, laughing with friends, making plans for the week ahead. By 3 in the morning, they were walking 50 meters down a quiet street to the place where they were staying ready to sleep. They never made it inside. What happened next would take investigators months to untangle. And when they finally did, what emerged was one of the most disturbing cases of betrayal, jealousy, and calculated violence that France had seen in years. And at the center of it all was someone Leslie and Kevin had trusted completely. As always, viewer discretion is strongly advised. The village of Prahek sits in the Deux-Sèvres department of western France, tucked into the kind of quiet countryside that doesn't make the news very often. About 2,200 people live there. Everyone knows everyone. Gossip moves fast, and the kind of serious crime that fills courtrooms tends to happen somewhere else. Somewhere bigger, somewhere less familiar. By late November of 2022, Christmas decorations were starting to go up. Night fell before 6 o'clock. The air had that particular cold that settles into small French villages in winter, the kind that pushes people indoors early and keeps the streets empty long before midnight. It was in this setting, quiet, unremarkable, the kind of place where nothing really happens, that Leslie Horlbeck and Kevin Trompat disappeared. Leslie was 22 years old. She had grown up in the region and was, by every account, the kind of person people remembered. Facial piercings, a partially shaved head, tattoos, including one she had done on her cheek on the very day she disappeared. She wasn't someone you forgot after meeting her once. She had lost her mother to illness when she was 12. That loss brought her closer to her father, Patrick, and when he remarried, Leslie took quickly to her stepmother, Emily. The two built a genuine bond, the kind that doesn't come easily and doesn't go quietly when something goes wrong. Those who knew Leslie described her the same way every time. Free-spirited, energetic, a ray of sunshine. She loved dogs. She had two, including a Staffordshire Malinois cross named Onyx, who went everywhere with her. At 22, she was also building something for herself. She had launched her own painting business just months before her disappearance, L.H. Pencher, the initials standing for Leslie Horlbeck. Her clients described her as reliable and always on time. The fact that she missed a client appointment that Monday morning was one of the first signs to those paying attention that something had gone seriously wrong. Kevin Trompat was 21. His background was more complicated. His father, Guy, had a long criminal record. Convictions for violence and drug trafficking, more than 20 in total, with nearly 12 years served in prison. At the time Kevin disappeared, Guy was incarcerated. Despite all of that, by every account, the two were close. Photos on social media showed it clearly. Guy described Kevin as the most important person in his life. Kevin was finding his way. He had worked various jobs in catering, he was passionate about fishing and hunting and had plans to build a business around it. He was working toward his driving license. He had a fitted-out van parked at his stepmother's house that he was gradually making his own. He also sold drugs. That part of his life was known locally. He had disputes with people who owed him money. One of those people was the friend currently letting him and Leslie stay rent-free in his house. Kevin and Leslie had only been together a few weeks when they disappeared. They had met through mutual friends, fallen quickly, and become inseparable. They were young, they had plans, and on the evening of Friday the 25th of November, 2022, they were having dinner. The evening began at the home of a man named Nicolas Renaud, a friend of Kevin's father who lived in Prahek. The couple arrived around 7 in the evening. Beer, a slow-cooked stew, video games, conversation. The kind of night that doesn't ask very much of anyone. Earlier, they had stopped by the home of Tom Trulé, a mutual friend who was lending them his house for the weekend, for a quick drink before Tom headed out to a techno party. They left Onyx at Tom's for the night. Kevin was in good spirits. He had plans to buy a car later that evening, a significant purchase, 10,000 euros in total. His stepmother, Karine, had already brought him 5,000 euros in an envelope to cover half. He was carrying the full amount with him. Around 9:30, Kevin left Nicholas's apartment and walked to the village square to meet the seller. When he arrived, he stopped. On the square, parked at a distance, was a white car, 5 men inside. They were watching. Kevin wasn't carrying the money in anything secure. He was alone on a deserted square, late at night. He understood quickly what he was looking at. He turned around and walked back to Nicholas's. He called his father, explained what had happened, then told Karine when she arrived. She stayed a while to reassure him before leaving around 10:30. The car purchase was abandoned for the night. Meanwhile, Leslie had slipped out briefly to a neighboring village to collect some belongings from a friend named Jeremy, who had put her up on several occasions. She stayed longer than expected, talking, and didn't return to Nicholas's until 11:30. Dinner was finally reheated. The evening continued. At 2:38 in the morning, Tom Ochel, still at his party, sent Leslie a message. He asked whether she planned to stay much longer, or whether he should take something to keep himself going through the night. Leslie replied that she wasn't feeling well. She had been vomiting blood and wanted to go home quietly. Those were her last recorded messages. Around 3 in the morning, Leslie and Kevin left Nicholas's apartment and walked toward Tom's house. 50 meters, maybe less, a short walk down a quiet street on a cold November night. They were never seen again. When Tom returned from his party the next morning, the house was empty. No Leslie, no Kevin, no Onyx. He assumed they had already left. Nicholas, back at his own apartment, found a jumper that didn't belong to him. He sent a message to the couple to let them know. It was never opened. Tom sent messages to Leslie over the following days. Casual at first, asking where she was, what she was doing. Then more pointed. Those too went unanswered. Leslie and Kevin were adults. They moved around. They went to parties. They slept at different places depending on the night. Leslie's family didn't want to worry without reason. They trusted her. But she always checked in, always sent a message, always let people know she was all right. By December the 3rd, a full week after the night they disappeared, Patrick filed a missing persons report. It was the unanswered text, one too many, that finally pushed him to make the call. The gendarmerie entered their names into the missing persons register, and what had been a quiet private concern became, without anyone fully realizing it yet, a criminal investigation. The first interviews were brief. Tom told investigators he had been putting the couple up free of charge. He said he'd had no news since returning from the party, that everything had seemed fine between them, and that by the time he got home they had already gone. He had no idea what could have happened. Kevin's stepmother, Corrine, recounted the failed car purchase and the 5 men who had apparently been waiting on the square. An early theory began to take shape. What if those 5 men had followed Kevin back from the square, waited for him and Leslie to leave Nicola's apartment at 3 in the morning, and ambushed them in the street? Investigators weren't convinced. No one in the neighborhood had heard anything. The streets in Prague are narrow. 5 men attacking 2 people would have made noise. If there had been blood, there would have been traces. None were found. There was also a detail that didn't sit right. Kevin didn't have a driving license. So why spend 10,000 euros on a car with no record of any listing or known seller, carrying the cash in an unsecured bag? The lead stayed unclear. And then, 8 days after the disappearance, something was found that made all the early theories collapse at once. An employee of a clothing charity discovered bags inside a donation bin on December the 8th. Inside were 3 pairs of shoes, including Leslie's Doc Martens, which people who knew her said she never went without, a toiletry bag, a hairbrush, makeup, work clothes stained with paint, sweatshirts belonging to Kevin, a road safety certificate, a wallet in Kevin's name, and shotgun cartridges. The couple's belongings packed into bags and deposited in a bin, a short drive from where they had disappeared. Nobody runs away barefoot in November. Nobody leaves behind their work clothes, their wallet, their shoes. The theory of a voluntary disappearance was set aside immediately. Leslie's family had never believed it. Now investigators were catching up. The question was no longer where the couple had gone. The question was what had been done to them, and by whom. The second theory, an accident, a vehicle striking them on a dark road, a panicked driver, was also examined and discarded. No braking marks, no sign of impact, nothing along the roads around the village. What remained was the only explanation that fit the evidence. Someone had targeted them deliberately. The New York prosecutor's office forwarded the file to the Criminal Investigation Division in Poitiers on December the 27th. A month after they disappeared, Leslie and Kevin were no longer categorized as missing. A judicial investigation was opened for abduction and unlawful detention. 120 interviews were conducted. Forensic units were deployed. Bodies of water were surveyed. Search parties, organized by friends and family, combed fields and roadsides. And in all of that activity, investigators began paying close attention to one person in particular. Tom Trulé was 22 years old at the time of the disappearance. He was unemployed, working occasionally as a kitchen installer. He had known Leslie for years through the rave scene, techno parties, shared friends, a lifestyle they had in common. He had also briefly been with her. Not seriously, on Leslie's part. A night or two. Nothing more. But for Tom, it had meant something entirely different. He had left his girlfriend at the time because of it. He had believed, or convinced himself, that something real was beginning. When it didn't, he didn't move on. He was still sending Leslie messages asking for advice about his romantic situation the night before she disappeared. These were not first-time messages. This was a pattern. Tom was also connected to Kevin. He bought from him occasionally. He owed him money, not a small amount. 30,000 euros, accumulated over time. So the picture that emerged once investigators started pulling threads was this. Tom Trouillet had watched the woman he was in love with fall for another man. That man was sleeping with her under his own roof. That man was also his creditor. And Tom was the one who had generously offered them a warm place to stay. That combination, romantic humiliation, financial pressure, and the daily proximity of both, had apparently been doing something to him for weeks. When investigators examined footage from the searches organized in January, they watched Tom closely. He laughed. He seemed detached. He moved through the searches without the anxiety visible on almost everyone else around him. And when he spoke to journalists about his missing friends, he spoke about them in the past tense. He was a really good guy, he said of Kevin. She was clearly my confidant, my best friend, he said of Leslie. Behavioral specialists within the gendarmerie flagged it. It was subtle, but it was consistent. And then investigators looked at his alibi. Tom had told them he had gone to a rave in a place called La Crèche on the night of the disappearance and hadn't returned to Prague until Sunday. His mother later backed the story. Leslie's family had been conducting their own investigation. Patrick and Emily had put together their own file. They had a suspect. They had an idea of what had happened. They were waiting for the evidence to catch up. When they looked into the rave Tom claimed to have attended, they found no record of any event near La Crèche on the night of November 25th to 26th. And when investigators pulled Tom's phone records, the picture became definitive. His phone had been geolocated at his Prague home that night. Not at a party in another commune, at his house, at the exact time Leslie and Kevin were walking back toward it. On February the 28th, 2023, Tom was arrested at his father's home in the Vendée. At first, he stayed calm. He told investigators that lots of people connected to Leslie and Kevin would be questioned. He wasn't concerned. But when they searched his apartment, took his computer and car, and searched his mother's home, something shifted. He understood then that the situation was serious. He was formally charged on March the 2nd. And then he gave investigators two names, Nathan Badji and Enzo Cella. Tom's version of events was this. He hadn't done anything to Leslie and Kevin himself. He had only provided his friends with information. Where the couple would be that evening, what time they would be coming home. Nathan and Enzo had issues with Kevin. Tom had simply told them where to find him. Whatever happened after that had nothing to do with him. Investigators were not satisfied. Nathan Badji, 22 years old, was arrested in La Rochelle on March the 1st. He was from Puyrevol, known to the gendarmerie for drug-related matters, and described by neighbors as not particularly well integrated. He lived in a fitted-out van in his parents' garden. That van was seized. His parents' home was searched. And the home was located just a few hundred meters from the Le Relais donation bin, where Leslie and Kevin's belongings had been found. His phone had also pinged near Tom's on the night of the murders. He was charged with murder on March the 3rd, along with tampering with the crime scene, obstructing the course of justice, and abduction and unlawful detention. Enzo Cella, 23, was arrested on March the 2nd. Unlike Nathan, he had no prior record. He looked, by most accounts, like someone who had gotten involved in something far beyond anything he understood. He was charged on March the 4th with the same offenses. A fourth name then surfaced from the interrogations. Michael Zadi, 23, from the Angers area, charged on April the 12th. And a fifth, Stephen Mathieu, 24, who worked as a night security guard in Le Havre and went by the nickname Le Casse. He had reportedly been described to the group as someone capable of making a body disappear. He hadn't been in Prague on the night of the murders. He had arrived later by train from Paris, summoned specifically to deal with what had been left behind. Stephen purchased lime, a shovel, rat poison. He was charged with concealment of corpses and tampering with a crime scene. 5 men. A 2-person tent on a private plot. A frozen field. And somewhere underneath all of it, Leslie and Kevin. What the interrogations eventually reconstructed was this. At 3 in the morning on the 26th of November, Leslie and Kevin left Nicholas's apartment. They had eaten, they had drunk, they had spent the evening the way young people spend evenings. They were happy, they were tired, they were ready for bed. They walked toward Tom's house. Tom was already there. He had cut his party short. When the couple arrived, the three of them talked briefly. Nothing seemed unusual. Tom made an excuse, a phone call, and stepped outside. That was the signal. Driven to the scene by Enzo, Nathan and Michael got out of the car and approached the building. They had a hammer and a machete. As they moved inside, pepper spray filled the house. Leslie and Kevin barely had time to understand what was happening before their eyes were burning and 2 men were through the door. Tom came in behind them. In the living room, Kevin, who stood nearly 1.90 meters and was struck with a hammer by Nathan and went down. In the kitchen, Tom held Leslie down while Michael swung the machete. Michael would later claim he hadn't intended to be fatal, that he had aimed for her shoulder. The blow was fatal regardless. Leslie, through the chaos, through the burning in her eyes, recognized one of the figures in the room. She asked why. Tom didn't answer. He went back to the living room, where Kevin was dazed on the floor, still trying to shield himself with the sofa cushions. Tom took the hammer from Nathan. He shoved his accomplice aside, and he didn't stop. Blood covered the walls, blood soaked the carpet. Tom screamed that Kevin shouldn't have betrayed family. Kevin stopped moving. Onyx, locked in the bathroom, had been barking throughout. Outside in the freezing dark, Enzo sat in the car with the engine off, keys in the ignition, watching the door. At some point, the door opened. The 3 men came out. Behind them, the bodies of Leslie and Kevin were carried to the car and placed in the boot. Enzo hadn't signed up for this. He couldn't drive. Tom took the wheel. They drove toward a private plot of Tom's near Coulomb. But someone had forgotten the keys. They turned around. Back in Prague, they cleaned the house quickly, roughly, not carefully, and gathered the couple's belongings into bags. The bags that would later be found in the donation bin, designed to suggest Leslie and Kevin had simply left. They drove again. Somewhere on the road, they heard sounds from the boot. Tom stopped the car. He and Nathan got out. They opened the boot and found that Leslie was still alive. Tom had a dagger. He used it. Nathan was also involved, according to later testimony. Both blamed the other. They drove on. They reached the Marais Poitevin, a stretch of wetlands west of Niort, flat and dark and poorly lit even in daylight. The bodies were unloaded, but Leslie still wasn't dead. She was trembling. She was barely conscious. She was still moving. Tom picked up a shovel. He struck her across the chest. Once, twice. More than that, according to the others who were there. After everything, the pepper spray, the machete, the knife, the boot, the freezing night, Leslie went still. The 2 bodies were left under a tent already pitched on the plot. Tom, Nathan, Michael, and Enzo returned to Prague and scrubbed the apartment with white spirit. They weren't careful enough. A blood-stained ring belonging to Leslie would later be found during the search. At dawn, Tom drove to a techno party. Nathan traveled to La Rochelle to meet Stephen, who had arrived by train from Paris. The 2 bought lime and rat poison. They returned to the plot. They buried Leslie first, covering her body with lime, digging into frozen ground for hours. Kevin was buried separately, a few kilometers away, in Betrayal, a few days later. After it was done, the 5 of them returned to their lives. Tom participated in the searches. He embraced Leslie's family. He spoke to cameras about his missing friends. He even visited Kevin's father in prison to tell him he was doing everything he could to find them. On March the 3rd, 2023, 3 months after the night on the village square, Kevin's body was exhumed from a field in Betrayal. On March the 4th, Leslie's was found nearby. Both were covered in lime. Their deaths were officially recorded on the dates the bodies were discovered. Leslie Horlbeck was 22 years old. Kevin Trompat was 21. Kevin's father, Guy, recently released from prison, organized a white march in their memory on March the 12th. He stood in front of cameras with tears running down his face. "They destroyed lives," he said. "They destroyed my family. I can't live without my son." What followed in the courts was a process as slow and painful as the investigation had been. All 5 suspects were formally charged. Stephen had not been present at the time of the murders and was not charged with killing anyone, only with disposing of what had been left behind. Enzo, whose role had been limited to driving, was eventually released under judicial supervision, still charged but no longer detained. Stephen was also released. For Leslie's family, each release was another blow. The judicial reconstruction was held across 2 nights in October 2024. October the 2nd in Prague, October the 3rd in the Marais Poitevin. The 5 suspects were brought together, surrounded by investigators and legal representatives, and asked to walk through what had happened, to demonstrate, to show where they had stood and what they had done. Some of them could be seen smiling in photographs taken during the reconstruction. Tom, throughout, continued to deny that he had intended for anyone to die. He said he had only wanted Kevin frightened, not killed. He denied delivering the fatal blows. Nathan and Michael contradicted him directly. None of the 5 ever fully confessed to the murders. In September 2025, all 5 accused were referred to the Assizes Court, France's highest criminal court, by indictment order. 3 of them face assassination charges. The prosecutors described the motive as a combination of romantic disappointment and financial debt. As of the time of writing, no trial date has been set. The possibility of further appeals could push proceedings into 2027. Kevin's father, Guy, has not been quiet in the interim. Consumed by grief and rage, he has posted on social media about the suspects with a regularity that eventually brought him before a court himself. He was convicted of making death threats in June 2023 and sentenced to 18 months, 6 of which were suspended. At the bar, he looked exhausted. He had lost 12 kilograms. He said he needed help. He said he had spoken in anger. The incitement to murder charge was dropped. There are things about this case that remain unanswered. The 10,000 euros Kevin was carrying on the night he was killed were never recovered. Onyx, Leslie's dog, has never been found. Nathan claimed he released him in the Dordogne, 100 kilometers away, unable to follow through on the order to put him down. That may be true. It may not. Whether Leslie was a deliberate target or whether she was killed because she was there that night, inseparable from Kevin and simply in the way, is something her family rejects entirely. She was always with Kevin. Whoever planned the attack would have known she would be there. The crime was organized. The hammer, the machete, the pepper spray, the car waiting outside, Stephen arriving by train from Paris with lime and a shovel. None of that happens by accident. Tom Trulli introduced Leslie and Kevin to each other. He opened his home to them. He sat across from her father and stepmother at search events, embraced them, told cameras he would do everything to find his little sister. Then, when the evidence closed around him, he gave 2 names and said he had only told some friends where to find them. If you made it this far, thanks so much for watching.